Welcome to the second in a series of Jamie's Farm events called Digging Deep. This one is called Cultivating a Culture of Care. You can spot the agricultural metaphors going on. Now, in last month's event, we looked at the way COVID has affected young people, particularly their well-being, the challenges, the opportunities, and the lessons learned. And it was frankly fascinating. I think you can get the video still if you weren't on that session. But whether you were or if you're new to this series, welcome to today's event. Now, of course, if we care about the well-being of young people, if we want them to thrive, should we care just as much about the well-being of the adults in the organizations that care for them? Or should they just toughen up? That's the question behind this afternoon's session. And of course, we'll not just be answering that question, but also, what does it mean to care about well-being? What does it mean to have a culture of care? How do you do it well? As a leader, as an organization, and indeed as a system. Now, my name is James Westhead, and I'm here because, well, I'm fascinated by these questions like you, but both as a former BBC education and health correspondent, as a former trustee of Jamie's Farm, and now at Big Society Capital, where I now work, and we invest in purpose-driven organisations that are ultimately about people's well-being. I'm also asking this question: can you achieve that without putting your own people first? Now, looking at this session that you're joining, just to give you a sort of forward look on what we'll be doing. First, we'll hear some of the latest scientific thinking and the data around this, which is fascinating. We will also hear from some extraordinary leaders in the field, and we'll also hear what cutting-edge business is doing in this area. And finally, we'll hear about young people themselves and the impact on them. So it really promises to be a fascinating listen, and I'm delighted to have you with us. First of all, though, we've got to start with Jamie's Farm. Now, of course, this is an enterprise built around a culture of caring and has helped thousands of young people with some of the most challenging lives. It was founded, as many of you know, 12 years ago by Jamie Feilden, a Teach First teacher, and his mother, Tish, a child psychotherapist, to help put young people on a more positive path through farming, family, and therapy. And I'm hoping, and I'm delighted to welcome them up to the stage. And we can start this session, first of all, with a chat with Jamie and Tish. Now, are they able to join us? I'm hoping, as if by magic. Oh, you're actually together. This is such a rare thing to see. That's fantastic. Is that going to work in a Zoom world? Two people on one camera. We can do this. So Jamie and Tish, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Excellent. And it's really good to see you. That's better. We can see you properly. So what I want to just start off by asking you, you've built an extraordinary, strong organization, and the culture among the staff is so critical. At what point, when you were founding Jamie's Farm 12 years ago, did you realize that that was going to matter so much?
It's a really good question. I think it took some time, actually, in that from day one, there was an extraordinary purpose amongst those who were working with the young people. And without consciously recognizing the need for that extraordinary sense of team, that extraordinary sense of common purpose, and that extraordinary sense of commitment to those young people, I think we were laying the foundations of a culture that remains very similar in what we do day to day across our farms now. That's a good question about at what point. I suppose we piloted the program 10 times before we went full time, and I think very early on we realised that the outcomes for the young people depended on the quality, motivation, and skill set of the staff that we were calling in at that point as volunteers.
Tish, what was your take on that?
I think we were very fortunate that we had people with an incredible can-do spirit It was a bit of an adventure. They were willing to be very athletic and as Jamie said, purposeful and flexible, because we, from one week to the next, we got different types of children and groups, and we were making it up to start with as we went along, but basing what we did on how the children responded. And as Jamie said, the response from the children was so incredible to working with an enthusiastic, dedicated, and quite ambitious, with high expectations, group of professionals, because they were ex-teachers, the people we were working with, and some other volunteers. And I think that it very quickly became apparent that the magic of it for us, like the sustainability, was the feedback loop. And the magic of it was that we could all work flat out all week. In those days, we were doing, 24-hour shifts. But it was worthwhile because what we saw was the injection of that spirit into the children and the responses.
And Tish, I want to ask you some more questions about that, but I also just wanted to take the moment to flag to people that on the right of their screen, they should be able to see questions and chat. Please feel free. This is wholly interactive. Chuck in some questions and we'll pass them on and get both Jamie and Tish to answer, but as we go through the session, other people to answer them as well. So you mentioned the commitment of your staff. I mean, the challenge around that, though, is how do you ensure that they can actually cope with this consistently? Because it is incredibly challenging doing the work that your staff do, both with young people and with animals.
Yeah, I think it's about valuing people and giving them the time of day, the individual time of day, to tell them how much you value them. And it's like the informality of that, the exchange of appreciation is incredibly important to the motivation of people. And I think because we always eat together, even if as a staff group, if we haven't got kids on site, we still eat together. We have fantastic points of celebration. It's that kind of being able to work hard, play hard. But I don't know what you would say, Jamie, about that question.
Yeah, I think in terms of hours, they're long weeks. A lot of our staff have, the guys who work with the kids are working on average an evening and a half a week. But there's so much fun, joy, nourishment in the work. So, we are blessed with that on our side. Staff stay a very long time. Our staff retention rates are exceptionally high. When we do staff surveys, overall, the satisfaction of working at Jamie's Farm is really, really high. But I think that comes from being nourished, but also we have a lot of fun. We provide... I think we're really bereft of the opportunities to get together that we normally have. We throw a fantastic Christmas party where I hog the stage for an hour and a half, where I talk about every single person in the room and celebrate what they've done over the year. And we have away days in near Brecon in Wales for 2 days. And people have really missed that stuff because there is a real sense of joy, common purpose, nourishment. And I think that really sort of carries people through the long weeks, and also prevents them from counting the cost as such, because I think we'd be in real trouble if everyone was clock watching and feeling that this was just a drudgery rather than enjoyment.
Yeah. No.
One of the, because I totally get that, and it'd be interesting to understand how you managed during the whole pandemic period. But one question that was coming to my mind when you were speaking was, how do you, in an environment where you've really got to put the children first, how do you encourage people to put themselves first?
I think people have to be very honest and authentic. This work is all about authenticity with the children, encouraging them to be able to tell you what they need and what's happening for them rather than act it out. So our staff, living in that culture of a sort of emotional honesty where we do check-ins, we give appreciations to each other. People take a lot of pride in being able to be upfront about what's happening, and the glue of the team, what I've noticed is right from the word go, although we actually were a family, on every farm, people talk about this family. And I think the thing that is in that is that in a functional family as a concept, you feel supported and stretched. And I think knowing that people care about you and know you, they know you very well. And one of the things is that we are very keen within our staff teams not to grow each team too big, not to add in too many extra people or extra things, so that people are both doing what they love doing, because if you don't do what you love, it doesn't work for the kids, but you're also doing it well. And then your satisfaction comes from that. And when you get exhausted, you know that your team members will always back you up. And in that flexibility I talked about, you know, they will step in when you need them. And they know each other's strengths and weaknesses. So you have to, as somebody put it to me, you've got to cover each other's backs, because, you know, certain children really trigger us, different individuals. So someone else will be quite good at moving into that space, maybe to calm something down or to motivate. And I think it is that sense of bothering to get to know your staff and not growing your cells or your family groups too big.
Tish, I love that idea that it's the family model could be applied to organisations as the model for how you care for your staff. And Jamie, I wonder, when you think about this culture that you've created, what do you think it is that what's the most valuable things that have come out of it? Why does it matter?
So that's a great question. I think. Well, I think ultimately what we've discovered through all of our kind of impact measurement is that the essence of moving children forward week to week depends entirely on our staff and the quality of staff and the quality of interactions and the quality of relationship building. So if we have a group of staff who are disgruntled, who are exhausted, who are feeling disenfranchised, who don't feel positive about the organisation, they're not going to be able to deliver those outcomes. So getting everyone in just the right place so that they can bring real joy, challenge, and ultimately life-changing experiences to those kids is our core business. So it matters intensely that we get that right.
Just one thing there is that we're always training. There's lots of staff training, and you can never be good enough. You can be good enough, but you can never be an expert in this job. So there's growth and there's change. You haven't hit your targets. You know, your targets are to become more and more refined in what you do and how you deliver it to the kids. So that gives ambition. People are involved in that ambition and vision.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the other things that occurs to me listening to you is that why culture might be particularly important at Jamie's Farm, perhaps even more so than in any other organisation, is what you were saying there, Jamie, in that the direct connection between your culture and your sort of output, if you like. You know, if you were making widgets, then the damage to the widget production line might be a year down the line from the culture going wrong. But if the culture goes wrong in Jamie's Farm, it's instant. The impact is right in front of you.
Yeah. And just to mention COVID as well, I think one thing we've seen is that people are so wedded to that culture, so wedded to the work. You know, we were fearful if people went on furlough for extended periods that maybe it would be hard to re-engage them. But what's been so clear from all of our staff is they're absolutely desperate to be back in the thick of it. Whether they work, you know, in the HQ office staff or whether they work with the kids, they feel excited about the work we do and they're desperate to do it. So that's been very heartening this year.
And just finally, because we've got to wrap up and move on, but I had a good question from Richard in the chat that really, as you look back, what has surprised you most and what has exceeded your expectations looking back? So just wrapping it up briefly.
Well, I would say growing. I had no expectation that we'd move beyond one farm, and the impact on the children and the effectiveness of what we can deliver and its replicability has been the thing that surprised me most. And it's fabulous to know that you can take something that works and you can do it with different people in a different place, as long as you get these ingredients right. And that's been really exciting. And now sharing that methodology more broadly with other organisations.
It's exciting for me as a trustee, because I remember those conversations early on where we thought there was a question, is it possible to replicate it? And now you've not only replicated it, you're spreading it. So that's the perfect sort of arc. I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thank you so much both. We're going to come back certainly to Tish later to hear a little bit more, including from some of the young people. But I'd just like to say thank you so much for that, and we'll do stay with us while we move on through this issue with some other interesting guests.
Thanks, James.
So the next thing working at it, thank you very much to Jamie and Tish, but what we want to hear about next is a little of the science behind this. So the importance of having a caring culture isn't just about it feeling right. What does the evidence say? Next, we're going to hear from a Professor Chris Beattie. He's the Honorary Professor of Cognition and Neuroscience at the University of Kent. And his research has shown that far from the survival of the fittest being the key to human evolution, it's the survival of the friendliest. And humans, after all, are the most pro-social animals on the planet. We literally need each other to survive. So we're now going to hear a bit from Chris about his theories, what he's learned, and how that feeds into a culture of caring.
Hello, my name's Chris. I'm Director of Science at CHX. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk to you today, and a real privilege to have been invited to do so by such an outstanding organisation that does such great work. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm here to talk about a relatively minor issue today, human nature. I'm going to try and cover off the entire topic in about 8 minutes, so I'll do my best. Right, humans, like all life on Earth, we're the result of biological evolution by natural selection. And as is the case with all species, over millions of years, the characteristics that were linked to human survival have been passed on to successive generations in our genetic material, whilst those that had a negative or zero effect have generally not been. And throughout evolution, resources such as food were scarce, so organisms had to compete to survive. And this has led to the often cited idea of survival of the fittest. Those that were best able to secure the resources, the fittest, were more likely to survive, more likely to mate and have offspring, and were therefore more likely to pass on that very DNA that had made them more fit in the first place. Theoretically, we should all have competitive DNA. And this competition model has been used to suggest that humans are inherently selfish, competitive, hostile, and always in the pursuit of our own survival, often at the expense of other humans. And whilst we recognise that culture and law have, for the most part, suppressed the extremes of these alleged innate competitive traits, this humans as competitor model is all too often borne out by watching, news media or social media. But the truth, what a few biologists are calling survival of the friendliest, is, I'm pleased to say, a little bit more encouraging. Empathy and altruism are seen as highly desirable but all too often rare human traits. They're all too often also seen as add-ons, aren't they? Behaviours we engage in when the necessary stuff has been done. But these two traits, empathy and altruism, are at the core not only of human behaviour but also of human biology, and might even explain the evolutionary success of humans. Now, many biologists suggest that empathy and altruism evolved as a result of the high level of dependency shown by mammal young, specifically because young mammals are dependent for a significant period of time after birth on their adult caregivers, on the parents, on the adults in the group. For the species to survive, adult mammals have to be very good at caring. And to enable this, when necessary, the young mammal has to be able to send signals, for example, of pain or of needs, signals we call emotion. And the adult not only has to be able to recognise these signals, but feel an equivalent signal in their biology, feel an urgency in their biology, a process we call empathy. And in order to resolve the cause of the emotion, the adult has to be able to respond with care, what we call altruism. Now, this all makes absolute sense. We see this all the time in mammal groups, but there is no mammal in which the young are more dependent and for longer than amongst humans. So amongst all species, humans theoretically have to be the most caring. This might be one of the things that really singles humans out from other animal species. And theoretically, the extraordinary achievements of the human race might not be down to our ability to compete, but might be down in large part to our peculiar ability to signal and to respond to each other's needs in real time, to cooperate as opposed to our ability to compete. So how does this extension of this kind of adult-young dependency care cycle work in the broader social group? Now, throughout 99% of evolutionary history, and still in many parts of the world today, if I live in a social group, what is good for the group as a whole is generally also good for me. I've got more chance of surviving if the group survives. And if I contribute to the group has got more chance of surviving. If, however, I think too hard about whether I contribute, and the key word here is think. If I think too hard about whether I contribute, if I'm worried about whether I will get the resources I've contributed back, and if other members of the group likewise think too hard about whether they contribute, then the group becomes less altruistic. It shares fewer resources, and logically its chances of surviving are reduced. Now, groups that reduce their chances of surviving by thinking too hard about whether to give to the group survived at a lower rate than those groups whose members automatically gave to the group without question. And the latter group passed on their DNA at a higher rate than the former. And on this basis, the majority of people alive today, being descendants of those altruistic people, the people who gave their resources without question, have altruistic DNA. Now, what does altruistic DNA do? Well, it motivates us to help others without questioning whether we will receive something in return. And this form of altruism is hardwired into the human behavioural repertoire in the same way as other survival-related behaviours, such as eating, which is good for the survival of the individual, and mating, which is good for the survival of the species. That is via the activation of neurotransmitter systems, such as the dopamine system, the endogenous opioid system, the cannabinoid system, the serotonin system, and the oxytocin system, all of which are neurobiological responses that make us feel good and essentially reward us, and therefore make it more likely that we do it again. It makes it feel good, so we're more likely to do it again. So we feel good when we give without expecting anything in return, because like eating and mating, which also made us feel good, altruism increased our chances of survival as well as that of the group. It's hardwired into our neurobiology, and these effects are likely enhanced during times of greater challenge. But there's a twist. Just because empathy and altruism are both hardwired and biological, it doesn't mean that they are, for want of a better way of putting it, switched on all of the time, that they are ever-present and universal human behaviours. So let's assume that they've been switched on by evolution and ask what factors might have switched them off. We can look at the brain in many, many different ways, but let's use a car metaphor here. We can see the evolutionarily ancient brainstem or instinctive brain as the accelerator, providing motivation and energy to the system. We can see the evolutionarily more recent limbic system or emotional brain as the steering wheel, providing direction and preference. Where do we want to go with all of that energy and that motivation? And we can see the evolutionarily most recent neocortex or executive brain very much in the role that most neuroscientists agree is a major part of its function as inhibitor. It's the brakes of the system, it's the control, it's the regulation of the energy and the direction. And this is important. In the developed world, we live in cultures in which executive inhibition of many of our better traits is common. Society, organisations, and even leaders often inadvertently or sometimes even deliberately pit people against each other, often requiring people to inhibit their better natures and in doing so to express their more competitive sides. This is often in the false expectation that mutual competition results in better outcomes than mutual cooperation. It's an interesting approach, because when it comes to the human race, evolution, and let's face it, evolution was pretty good at this stuff, evolution appears to have decided that cooperation was the better model. Whether societies and organisations will catch up is a decision that's largely in their own hands. Thank you very much for your attention over the last few minutes. Have a great conversation. Bye-bye.
Chris, fascinating. Thank you so much for those insights. And it's that sort of distillation that actually it's cooperation, not competition, that is hardwired into us, and altruism, not self-seeking. And perhaps altruism, or rather, is more natural to us than we might think, and that we are, in a sense, sometimes inhibiting our better nature. So how can we use all that? We're going to come on to that next, and I just want to flag on the right hand side, we have a fascinating poll running. So we've got a few people contributing that way, but you can also contribute through the chat and the questions, if you, particularly as we come on to our debate shortly. So polls. What is the most important element of staff culture is what we're trying to find out, and you can answer that question. Now, the next question we're looking for is on this theme of cultivating a culture of care, is how we do this. So we're going to hear from 4 of the leading practical experts who are actually achieving this in many different ways. First of all, I'd like to invite up to the stage, hopefully they're out there and can just press their join the stage buttons. I'd like to invite up Benna Waits. Now, Benna is a consultant psychologist in the NHS, so she's helping run an organisation with thousands of people, which has come under considerable strain over the last year, as we know. I'd also like to invite Steve Chalke. He's, well, you will know as the founder of the Oasis Charitable Trust and the Oasis Academy chain, and we are increasingly familiar with him as a commentator on the Today programme and elsewhere, so we're very lucky to have him here today. And I'd like to also invite up Ruth Young. Now, Ruth heads up Jamie's farm in Hereford, the farm in Hereford, and so she is, if you like, implementing the approach that we were hearing about earlier. So it would be great to hear a little bit more of detail around that. And last but definitely not least, we're lucky to be joined by Andy Holmes. Now, Andy is this is a great title to have, I think, the Global Head of Wellbeing. The Global Head of Wellbeing for Reckitt Benckiser, I think I've pronounced that correctly, I'm sure you'll correct me if I haven't, which is, again, a timely organisation. It's one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, and we're very keenly aware at the moment how important that is. So, should we care more about a caring culture, or should we just tell our staff to toughen up? That's really the first question for us, and I'm going to start on this with Benna. What's your take on this, and how do we do it in practice?
Thanks, James. So I work in an NHS organisation that employs around about 13,000 staff, and as part of my role I get involved in thinking about wellbeing across our organisation. And I think that some of what we do, despite some of the differences in our core business, has real relevance for education and social care settings. Firstly, I'd really like to just challenge this notion of toughening up, which I think relates to a really unhelpful idea that is sadly all too prevalent of resilience as some kind of endurance sport. So it seems to me that part of being strong is sometimes being able to admit that we're struggling. Sometimes being part of not being okay is being not okay. And I guess there's something about admitting vulnerability that feels like a really powerful thing to do in the process of wellbeing. So just wanted to challenge that idea of toughening up, because I don't think it's a very helpful one, and it's not very well supported by the evidence. So why should we care about wellbeing? For many of us, I think it feels like the right thing to do. It just feels like it's kind of part of the work. And I think you really heard that when Jamie and Tish were talking earlier. Working with people, particularly people who've suffered trauma, adversity, can be really overwhelming at times. And actually, part of taking care of their well-being is making sure that we don't break people. It just feels like the right thing to do. But actually, there's a growing evidence base that says that when we take care of well-being, actually performance improves. There's a really clear relationship between those things. So staff that are thriving do a better job. And I think there's a really helpful confluence of that kind of, there are some of us that get there because we think it's the right thing to do, and some people get there because it's maximizing performance, but essentially we all need to be pulling in the same direction. What does it mean to care about well-being? So for us, it's not just an individual reactive response. So it's really important if you have staff members that are really distressed, to be able to pick that up, to offer counselling, to be able to offer support, whatever that looks like. But it also feels very important to think about it at a systems proactive level. So when we were preparing for this, and I hope Steve won't mind me shamelessly pinching his analogy, because I thought it was so perfect for making this point, and I'm worried he won't get around to saying it. If people keep falling in the river, do you keep on throwing life rings, or do you build a bridge? So I think we need to create conditions where people are able to sustain themselves and not burn out. Ultimately, to keep giving care, you need to be taken care of. And that's a responsibility that needs to be held by organisations as well as individuals.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I think given that you've stolen Steve's line, which I'm sure is culturally slightly a bit of an issue, I'd like to invite Steve. Look, Ben has given a fantastic overview of this. You're actually doing this on a significant scale in your schools and in your charities. What's your approach?
Well, I agree with everything that Ben has said, and was fascinated by what Jamie and Tish were saying earlier. Really, I've made loads of notes. Thank you very much, everybody. So I'm stealing ideas as well, because there's so much wisdom. I would say this, we have probably 5,000-6,000 staff around the country, and we work in our schools with around 32,000 children, and then with lots of young people beyond that, and countless volunteers. We have more volunteers than staff, thousands and thousands of them. And I've learned this. You learn through the mistakes you make, that in order to create the kind of organization that Tish was talking about, you need to think about the stress within the organization. Oasis is just about to take on what's called the UK's first secure school, which is an alternative to youth jail. We're going to open that next year with the Ministry of Justice. And we're told that what we need to provide is a trauma-aware environment, a trauma-sensitive environment, understanding young people's fears, not starting with the question, what have you done wrong, but what's happened to you, and slowly unpacking that. But what I've become more and more aware of, I think I knew already, but I can perhaps articulate more clearly now because of the 2-year preparation for this, is that a traumatized system will always create traumatized staff, and that in turn will lead to traumatizing of children, which was the wonderful thing about what Tish and Jamie were saying. It's to understand that creating a system where your staff and volunteers thrive, where they feel comfortable in their own skin, enables them to then stand in the shoes of someone else. Traumatized systems create traumatized staff, traumatized policies, and that traumatizes the young people that we're working with, or anyone else. But if you create that opportunity for people to rejoice in who they are without that stress, then you see something different. To illustrate that point, at the moment, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that we all know, whatever political view people have around schools, which is, you know, one of the things I'm very involved in, the Secretary of State goes on TV on Friday night and announces that schools have all got to be doing this, that, or whatever else it is by Monday morning. That creates stress and trauma in the system to staff that are overworked and exhausted, because they've now got to work all weekend to get in place whatever it was that was being put in place over this last year. By Tuesday morning, there's a new piece of guidance that reverses all of that. More stress, more trauma is created. Then in the middle of the pandemic, Ofsted comes round, and we don't know where we are with exams or mocks or not, or what it might be, etc., etc. And then there's the threat of the league tables. All of this builds stress in the system. And then you're the head of a school. So you end up feeling like, I've got to perform or else I'm out of a job. So I've got to hold these heads of year or heads of subject to account. And that trickles all the way down, all the way through to the mum that steps into reception with having had a bad morning. So that's why I thought what Jamie and Trish were saying was fantastic, because it starts where this needs to start, because garbage in, terrible stuff out, great input in, you create the kind of environment you're looking for.
Steve, that's a passionate message to the Secretary of State for Education. But just to challenge you a little nat on that, it could sound like you're kind of just saying, look, there's nothing we can do about it, and it's all of these problems are being put down on us. And of course, we're in the business in this webinar of finding out what we actually can do about it. And I'm sure you in your schools, you're not passing on. You're holding that stress. How do you do that?
Yes, well, exactly, and I'm not trying to make excuses for anything. I'm just talking about the fact that very often, as a young person comes to Jamie's Farm, of course, Oasis in Waterloo runs a little mini Jamie's Farm. It's a partnership between the two of us, and this whole idea that came to me from Jamie and Jake and others of farming therapy, working with these young people who are just looking for a place to find peace. Of course, that can only happen for them when those of us who can create the systems to allow that to happen. So Oasis is, like all other great good educators, working hard at this all of the time. But I believe it is the task of our generations, because if you stretch back to before the 1990s, nobody ever used the word neuroscience. I think Freud did once or twice and then abandoned it. It was in the late 1990s that, because of the MRI scanner, we could look into a brain and we could see what happens to a human brain when this stress is caused. So we got to build systems, haven't we, and build environments that allow human beings to develop differently, that the success of those who are friendly.
That leads me really neatly onto Ruth, and Jamie's Farm is seeking to do that and essentially build a system where young people can thrive. But as we've been hearing, you need to get the adults to thrive. What's your take on this? Toughen up versus caring culture. I'm guessing you're not going to say toughen up, but what's your take on how you can achieve it?
Thank you, James, and it's really lovely to be on such a panel. It's also really lovely to hear Tish say no one's ever an expert. I feel much more comfortable having heard her say that. The word toughen up, just like Benna looked at, I wanted to talk about for a minute, just because, we are presented with children who are presenting as tough. They've been through tough situations and they've built hard exteriors to deal with that. So the last thing we want them to do is toughen up. Actually, we want them to open up. We want them to feel hopeful. We want them to trust, and we want them to feel that the world and they have potential. If we were meeting them and saying that, but actually coming from a place of put up or shut up in any sort of way, well, at best it would be incongruous, but I think ultimately it wouldn't work. Like Tish said, it was great to hear her say, it's that authenticity that anyone who works with young people knows and can tell and won't listen to it if that authenticity isn't there. And I would actually say that we all get that sense. So that has to echo throughout the organisation from the very top. That's why it's so wonderful to hear Tish and Jamie speaking the way that they do, all the way through the organisation, that authentic belief in what you're doing, and that the strategies to help us hold to that are really important. The other word in the question is thrive. Now, I was an English teacher once upon a time, and so I looked this word up in the dictionary. We use it all the time, but I looked it up in the dictionary, and it means to develop and grow. And that really excited me because, well, for two reasons, really. One is that we use it in businesses, we use it with people, we also use it in nature and with agriculture and with plants. And we know that to have a successful farm, each thing needs different conditions. Each plant, each animal needs different soil, different water, different to be put out at a different type of year. Now they might need hardening up sometimes, slowly supporting to get to a certain place, but they definitely need to be seen as individuals. And I can't emphasize enough how pleased I was to see that's what Thriving carried. And the other thing was then taking that further, the idea it has movement in the word thrive. It has change to develop. And as a teacher, I think we know that the best moments of change and development often come at moments of challenge. In fact, they come at moments sometimes of failing and being able to cope with that failure and move forwards and move on. And so I think that seeing moments of challenge as moments of growth is something that Jamie's Farm does really well, because we're seeing the individuals that we're working with. We know them incredibly well. And so we're able to help them thrive. So no, not toughen up, but build resilience, harden up slowly through looking at the individual and through feeling a safe enough space that failure isn't something we're worried about.
Ruth, that's so fascinating, really, to hear, and yeah, really resonates with me. The importance of treating people as individuals, the moments of challenge, and you're not sort of dismissing the idea of toughening up. Actually, it's just you can actually use it. Could be the right moment, the right plant, the right animal, the right child could be appropriate. So I'm just going to come on to Andy now, because one thing that's interesting, Andy, is how you've been hearing how schools, how Jamie's Farm operates around, thinks about culture. You're thinking about it on a massive global scale, in fact. And
yeah.
My perception is that business is well ahead of education when it comes to thinking about the importance of culture, and that actually it's one area where education could learn from business. Although listening to some of the speakers, everybody's got something to learn from everybody, and I particularly like what Steve said, that the best learning moments when you make mistakes. Well, what are you learning from this, and what has education got to learn from what you're doing?
Well, I mean, firstly, I would tip my hat if I was wearing one to all of the panel guests. And I mean, it was like buzzword bingo sat here, I've got to be honest. First of all, Jamie and Trish, the stuff that you talk about is so inspiring. The way that you're approaching what you do, you talked about emotional honesty, about consistency, congruence, maintaining authenticity. These are all the absolute bedrocks of the things that I think really drive what we're trying to get to here. I had 3 words written down, and Ruth, congratulations. I think I got my first row with you, but I've written down safety, trust, and hope. Now, I'm a big believer in that our environment dictates our emotional response, our moods, which influences our behavior, ultimately which becomes culture. The culture is the collection of our cumulative behaviors. The other thing that I'm really we're really focused on with RB, and we have about 48,000 people across 72 countries, so it's a big beast. But what I would say is that listening to what you guys are talking about, we can learn from you. So there may be a couple of bits that we do, but I think the way that you're approaching this, the human-centric nature of the way that you're approaching this is incredibly powerful. The way that we're thinking about it is from a basis of survive, perform, and thrive. So obviously there's a performance element to it, business context, but survive, perform, and thrive. It used to be survive, thrive, perform. And to Ruth's point, we got to a point where we thought, you know what, you can actually be performing and delivering and be really unhappy in doing it. So the thing for us is, from a basic provision point of view, the provision of and access to and support must be a right, not a privilege. So that's the basis of everything. Have people got the basics to survive? Are they getting things like lunch breaks? Are they getting downtime? Are they getting time with their families? And are they doing that in a guilt-free way? Because that's the key piece. We employ people who are passionate and committed. I'm sure like the NHS and all of the, the charitable organizations do. But the danger with that is that people overgive. And when they overgive, you start to compromise yourself and your own survival and your own sort of psychological safety. The next piece stuff from that is, once you build this consistency, and to Tish talk to emotional honesty and congruence, this is about repetitive behaviors that demonstrate trust, that demonstrate authenticity, that demonstrate hope and safety. And if you get that, then people will start to commit and start to get involved. But the bit on top of that is the freedom to allow people to be emotionally themselves. And that's where the thriving bit, to Ruth's point, that for me is where the thriving bit comes from. In business, we talk a lot about inclusion, we talk a lot about collaboration, we talk a lot about innovation. These are all things that we do when we give discretionary effort. Now, we give discretionary effort when we feel safe, when we feel engaged, committed, and when we feel it will be reciprocated, which comes to the altruistic piece that Chris talked to. When we feel good about giving, we will give more. Now, the choice to give is the big bit here for me. The choice to give comes from the place that I feel safe, I feel hopeful, and I feel that those around me are the same. So, you know, when we come back to the point about, you know, is this as important for the staff or should they just toughen up? I think it's more important for the staff, because the staff set the tone and set the level of authenticity and congruence. If you want the kids to be open to say when they're not feeling safe, as opposed to putting on a shield of armor and fighting you for it, they have to see our staff do that first. And I think, you know, I was listening to all of you and I was thinking, you know what, I want to take this recording and play it back to our leaders, because I think in business, you know, we go all the time. We're always on. You know, I was in a panel with an explorer, Nick Hollis, about 2 weeks ago. And he said, with regards to resilience, he said, when do you get strong? And he said, in the adventure world, we get strong when we rest and recover. In the business world, you don't get the time to do that. You don't get the opportunity. You're always on. So I think for me, it's about, do you have a safe space that allows people, staff included, to say, you know what, I'm feeling unsafe. I'm feeling overstretched. I need to recover. I need to get strong again. So for me, these are really, really key points.
And that's fascinating, and I think that sort of really basic concept of safety, trust, hope is what I'm taking away, and the consistency. Now there are a bunch of good questions and good points cropping up on the questions and chat channel. So I just wanted to share a bit of them. I particularly like Lucy's comment about how language is important and how using the right words can actually take away stress, and she also adds the point that we need playfulness as well. Definitely true. But I wanted to pick up on something that Richard has chucked into the chat, and I wanted to ask Steve about this. So historically, we've had the watchwords of stiff upper lip and toughen up, and we are rightly moving away from that. But is there a danger of the pendulum swinging too far? And you know, could the going away from toughening up mean that we just, I don't know, we get flabby, we lose our focus on what we're trying to achieve as organizations, which is often for young people themselves? Do we lose our focus? Is that a risk?
That's a great question. As we had just been awarded this opportunity to develop this secure school, this youth jail. Now, I should say that the young people that will be sentenced to us would have murdered, raped. You won't be there because you peddled drugs or stole stuff from Sainsbury's. So I was questioned by the leader of the spokesman for justice in the House of Lords. Came to see me, sat down, had a coffee together, and they said, so tell me, what's your strategy? And I said, it's love, relentless love. And they looked at me and said, relentless love and what? And I said, relentless love and nothing. And they said, but isn't that soft? Isn't that easy? And I said, what's easy is locking a kid in a cell for 18 hours a day. What's easy is creating rules and regulations and not engaging in relationship with people. That's easy. That's always easy. To engage in relationship with people, to understand them, is a hard thing. Underneath Richard's question, James, Patricia's made a statement or a question about that it makes her think about the school curriculum and how we failed to respond to the current needs of society. So here's the thing about the curriculum, it's the same thing. So should the child fit the curriculum or the curriculum fit the child? Tough. Let's set the curriculum and let's have all these exams in place and make the kids leap, over this fence, this hurdle, or put on this suit of armor, or fit into this straitjacket. And if they can do that, they're a success. But it's not a one size fits all, is it? It's harder, much, much tougher, and much, much harder to think, what are the strengths of this child? What are the skills of this child? What are the needs of this child? And how do we develop a curriculum, a 21st century world-leading curriculum that understands that child? It's exactly what Andy's just been saying about the world of business. It's the same everywhere, isn't it? If I am understood and seen and heard and am comfortable in my skin, then I can stand in your shoes and begin to meet your needs. It's as simple as that, but it's really tough thing to pull off.
And I think just building on that, Steve, because one of the challenges we have, in the business world, and I think it's equally applicable. We have a lot of, ex-educators or current educators in the organisation, is that it's not always about completely changing the curriculum, but it's about being able to have the agility to change the context of the curriculum to fit the individual, so that they feel relevant, so that they feel connection with it, and so that they feel that they belong to something. I think my brother-in-law actually works with a similar charity, and one of the things he finds difficult is that what a lot of people, especially with the COVID world, we're obsessed with connection, we're obsessed with putting people together. That's not what people are looking for. What people are looking for is belonging. If you belong somewhere, you do so because you feel emotionally safe, emotionally connected, emotionally supported. And I think this is the bit. It's about how do we use our soft skills to frame the context of what is available for these people, so that it feels of value, so that it feels for them, so that it feels like it's going to enable them and they can connect with it and engage in it.
Thanks. And I'm having a sense, I love the relentless love, by the way, Steve, and you're getting a bit of affection for that in the channel. And what I'd love to move us on to, because I think we're in danger of violently agreeing, is how we actually enact this. How do we make it happen? I'd love to come to Benna. Just what are some of the things that you advise people to think about when trying to create this culture? How do we do it?
So there's a whole range of ways that we have tried to enact this, and it's lovely. You're quite right about the violent agreement. I'm loving relentless love, and that notion of creating cultures where people feel valued and a high sense of belonging is absolutely critical. I want to just introduce the notion of psychological safety. We've invested quite a lot of time in thinking about psychological safety in our teams, and that's a concept that's been pioneered by Professor Amy Edmondson at Harvard, which is about voice. So it's about people being able to raise issues, questions, concerns within teams. It's about being able to look at failure without fear of punishment, shaming, humiliation. And it's a really powerful idea, and certainly the evidence seems to be suggesting that it's highly correlated with systems that perform well, staff that thrive. In healthcare, safety is a huge issue for us, so systems that work safely. So we're particularly interested in it because the health service is very hierarchical, and actually we think that gives us problems with voice, and I suspect that also applies to education. So I'd really recommend looking at that work. For us, it's also about leadership. So this stuff absolutely can happen in kind of small pockets, and we see that across systems, but actually getting your top-down approach right, making sure that people understand the work of leadership. So we've invested in developing compassionate leadership training programs to support our leaders understand the work of leadership. So that's really important for us. We do something called Schwartz Rounds. I don't know if people have come across that. That's something that was developed by a Boston lawyer called Ken Schwartz, who was dying of lung cancer in his 40s. What he noticed was that it was in his caregivers, it was the small acts of human kindness that made the unbearable bearable. And I think what he's referring to there is that sense, what's been talked about lots today around authenticity, connection, but it's how we hold people in the work. So the Schwartz Foundation that was set up after his death set up this thing called Schwartz Rounds, which is where you bring a group of staff together to share food, and then to tell stories. So essentially you have 3 panelists who talk about some ways in which the work has impacted upon them, and then there's a general discussion. And we found those really powerful. We run them across hospitals, across our health board in Aneurin and Bevan, and they've been extraordinary catalysts of culture change in terms of the kinds of conversations people have with us, with each other. So that's really powerful. And the last thing I want to flag is something called compassion practices. This is something particularly close to my heart. There's a website that I'm hoping will get posted in the chat that we've recently launched, which is developing a series of, these are structured conversations, generally taking no more than an hour, and some of them are much shorter than that. But they're conversations that are oriented towards facilitating voice. So essentially there's turn taking, there's lots of really good listening, but focused on self-care, on connection, and on the values that underpin our work. And they're really powerful. We've done them with over 1,000 staff, and the feedback is extraordinary in terms of the way that it shifts people to be, to connect with each other and to take better care of themselves. So yeah, it feels like there's a whole range of things you can do, but I guess the really important point is that well-being is not, it's not a soft, fluffy, optional, extra, nice to have. It feels like it's a fundamental factor underlying the quality and safety of our services, and something that we need to design into our systems to sustain it.
And on that point, that was really fascinating. And just to flag for people, we have put in the chat section more information about compassion practices. And I'd love to pick up your psychological safety point that you started with and come over to Ruth, because I'd just like to hear a bit more about the practicalities of what that psychological safety looks like, because I know that at Jamie's farm you have this concept of safe spaces, for example, where people can raise things if they have concerns. Just talk us through a little bit of that. How does that work?
Well, we're really lucky at Jamie's Farm because everything that we do week in, week out is built to support people feeling safe, communicating honestly, opening up. So I will rattle through some of the practices that we do with both the young people and with our teams. So we will do check-ins where everyone is a bit like, I mean, Benna has actually run one once for me, where everyone in the circle has the chance to speak, to check in. We do it with the young people and sometimes with the staff as well, giving a number of where you are between 1 and 10 and why you're feeling that way right now. And the staff will do that without the young people there at the beginning and the end of the week, parking their weekend, whatever that's brought, so that they can release some of that to come into the week with the young people as well as they can. And then at the end of the week, parking what can have been a tiring week. And within that, there are other wonderful things we do. We do shout outs, which is a recognition of the people that we're working with, an appreciation of some small thing that they've done in the week. Sometimes we'll do a bit teachery, but we'll do an even better if, so a reflection on our own practice and what went well and what we're proud of in our own practice. All of those things we do within a circle with proper turn taking, phones off, you know, giving it as much respect for our team as we do for the young people. And I think that that's really important. Often in these practices, you know, if it's going to get lost, it'll get lost within the team. But also we're really lucky that all the informal stuff that we get to do with young people, and that is vital that adults do, we sit round a table and we have a beautiful home cooked meal that feels nurturing, that feels cared for, and we chat and we talk about ordinary things. And I wanted to say, you know, lots of people feel like in schools you can't do that, but I trained in a school, quite a maverick head teacher, but he had a teaching assistant who every morning in the tiny little staff kitchen, sometimes with a young person who was struggling to be in the classroom, she would cook homemade flapjacks and make really good quality coffee. And as I taught at the top of the building, the smells of that would drift up and I'd be thinking towards, you know, how wonderful that was going to be. What that meant was that all the staff came to the staff room at break time. They all spoke to each other with smiles on their faces because they were being given this nurture. So, I mean, at Jamie's Farming, we're incredibly lucky because we have these things built into our daily routines, but they are possible in other situations.
And that's what I want to come on to just finally, because we're actually, hard to believe, but we're actually running out of time on this discussion, because this is so fascinating. So just summing up what you just said in the chat, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the nurtured. And you raised the question, you said, look, we've built it into the fabric of Jamie's farm. How do other organizations, whether it's the education world, Steve, or the business world, Andy, how can you take that and build it into the structure of your organizations rather than trying to sort of leverage it in? I'll just give the last but one word to Andy and then come finally to Steve. Andy.
I think one of the biggest things for me is the old sort of industrial revolution model of top down has its merits, but bottom up crowdsourcing has a lot of momentum. And I think, for years and years and years, corporates have worked with consultancies and, we've created sets of values and behaviors and all this sort of stuff that gets cascaded down and everyone has to follow. There's a huge incongruence and inauthenticity to that. And I think what we're coming to realize is that and I always refer to this as millisecond lessons. So it's the tiny little day-to-day experiences that people have that create culture, that create social norms, that create expectations in the business. The danger is that if you do top down, you create a lot of expectation, a lot of anticipation, and quite often we underdeliver on that. So my real push would be, at worst, go top down, bottom up. Don't just go top down. I think that's the sort of the key piece. We see it all over the internet, influencers, bloggers, ambassadors, all this sort of stuff. We've got to move with the times. We're not in an environment now where you only listen to the leader. People listen to all of the noise that's around them. So I think the way that we're looking at it is how do we embrace that environment rather than trying to condition people to continue to function the old way? How do we embrace the environment that we know people are in? And how do we influence? How do we set examples? How do we set a tone of consistency and trust in order to make that the norm that people want to come towards?
It's fascinating, and it's amazing to see how businesses like yours are really grasping this and thinking about it. Steve, what when you hear that and then you look at the education system, how do you feel? How optimistic are you that we can build a culture of compassion and caring in our education system?
I'm very optimistic. There's a psychological theory. There are many of them, aren't there? Which is called referred attribution error theory. And what it basically means is when I do something wrong, when I'm rude, when I'm unkind, it's because I'm tired. It's because I've had a hard day. It's because I sat on Zoom calls all day long. It's because I've not had anything to eat. It's because I didn't get much sleep the night before. It's because I had a tough weekend. When you do something wrong, James, it's because you're morally broken. You see? So we give ourselves a better ride than anyone else. One of the psychologists I work with, he's got this great little thing. So he says he's a dick, but there's a reason he's a dick. In other words, there's always a reason why I behave in a self-centered way. And there's a thing behind the thing, a story behind the story. So what we have within Oasis, we have something which we call our TIP group, our trauma-informed practice group. And it's a multidisciplinary group from across the organization. We run lots of housing, education, community projects, etc., etc. And what it's still in the process of developing is what I call, but it won't be called in the end, an Oasis theory of everything. So in other words, how do you boil all this down practically? Not wrongly accrediting the other guy with what you wouldn't accredit yourself with. And so it's how do you write a good email? How do you make a helpful phone call to a colleague? How do you have a good conversation? When there's conflict, because no community can be at peace unless it's willing to address conflict. If you push conflict under the carpet, actually the community crumbles. How do you address conflict well? And what we're working hard on is spelling all this out, because it's easy to talk about being caring, selfless, honest. It's easy to talk about being resilient. What does that actually mean in practice? So we're working at those things all of the time, remembering that when I do something wrong, I know why I did it. I was having a hard day. So let me afford that same thing to someone else and work at these things together.
Steve, that's a great point to wrap up the discussion, and I'm glad you're going to give me that rather than tell me I'm a complete idiot when I make a mistake. And well, thank you so much to this wonderful panel. As somebody has already stolen my thought, a sublime contribution from everybody. And for those who didn't manage to capture everything that you said, we have actually managed to put some of the content from the rich points that you made in the chat, if you want to follow up on things like the Schwartz Rounds, which I definitely want to find out more about, and psychological safety and so on and so forth. It's in the chat. So thank you, everybody. You were great. And I'm going to move on from this fascinating conversation to the next stage of our session on creating a culture of caring. So we heard a bit there from Andy about how big business is doing this really well in some cases. And we thought it would be interesting to take an expert on the biology of business, on the sort of culture of organizations, and send him down to Jamie's farm. And get him to talk to Jake, the deputy CEO, among the animals, but talk about the staff. So we've got now Damien Stork, who's the founder of CHX and an expert on the biology of business, talking to Jake among the animals.
Here I am with Damien Stork, who's the founder of CHX, and I've had a wonderful experience of walking up various mountains with Damien, getting to know him. He's a fine man, and he set up a fantastic organisation that does a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today. So we're here in the lambing shed. You're going to hear some bleating at different points, I think.
Mostly from me.
Mostly, exactly, yeah. But at the same time, hopefully you'll hear a few things that we talk about. And actually, if you get bored of what we're saying, then at least you'll be able to see some beautiful sheep along the way. So we're going to be talking about culture, but also how well-being factors into that. And one of the things that I was particularly interested to talk to you about, Damien, is just how much we can learn from what corporates are doing at the moment. So one of the things that when we've spoken before, you said to me is all culture is, and it's good to define it, is the sum total of everyone's behaviour within an organisation. That's actually quite a good way of looking at it, because it means that it's everyone's responsibility to uphold it, which is definitely what we think about here at Jamie's farm. But I suppose one of the things I wanted to ask you is, you advise companies on how they need to improve their well-being and support the culture of their organisations. Why do they come to you, and what is it that they're looking for in terms of how to improve things for their staff so that they improve their outcomes at the end of it?
Well, thanks. Yeah, mostly organisations are coming to us because they don't know how to grapple with this mental health issue that is looming in most organisations, particularly in 2020 and in 2021. And we take a view of it. You've heard from Chris already on the subject of empathy, and I think the view we take is that mental health needs to be reframed in organisational cultures. Good mental health needs to become aspirational as part of the culture, not something that a few poor souls suffer from and frame it in the negative. So what we do is we work with leadership to start with, and we work with whole organisations to shift cultures so that good mental health becomes this aspirational goal. And I think, to your point, every single individual, we're surrounded by sheep, which is somewhat ironic, but every single individual in an organisation has a positive contribution to make to that culture. Part of our coaching is that you should not be a recipient of, you should not be a sheep, you should not be just following something that is dictated to you. You have an opportunity to shape it.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I suppose the interesting thing for me is, as we heard in the last one of the Digging Deep series, kids can tell straight away when an adult they're working with isn't on form. They know when they haven't been looked after. They know when they're suffering with their own mental ill health. And yet, strangely, educational organisations, social care organisations, often, for whatever reason, they're the slowest to actually respond to that and to look after the well-being of the staff, who are so vital in putting that care into the kids that they're working with. So I wanted to ask you, what if you were going to advise them for 3 tips? They haven't got all the money in the world, obviously, what would you ask leaders in those organisations to do in order to change the culture to support those kind of stuff?
Well, that's very, very common what you've just described, because leaders do not think of themselves first. So first thing is be selfish for a moment, because if you can't look after yourself, make yourself well, create the right mood state for yourself where you're giving off different vibes, if you like. As we've just heard from Chris regarding empathy, we feel those feelings. We don't see it necessarily or rationally think that someone is not necessarily being truthful with us. We feel it, we sense it. So if you as a leader or running an organisation like that are not able to look after yourself and make sure that you're in the prime state, you've got no chance of getting other people to believe it. So that's the first point.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But secondly, I would say every business, it doesn't matter if you're in corporate world or third sector or in education, you have to imagine think of altruism as the behavioural extension of empathy, as you will have just heard. And altruism operates at multiple different levels in an organisation. So it's the tiny things, the micro interactions between people in an office, if you're in an office, or in a farm. It's also the purpose of an organisation. But in between, there's a whole load of process and structure that we abide by in our roles and in our businesses that don't necessarily promote good altruistic behaviour amongst people. So it really comes down to individuals to say, I want a good outcome from this interaction. I'm going to kick off this interaction in a positive way. I'm going to give something or ask for something, express vulnerability and ask for help. So we have to think about altruism at multiple different levels. I would say that's another big area to look at, communications amongst people. So that's probably two things.
Two things. You got the communication one at the end as well, and that's one I wanted to look at now because it's quite interesting. You were talking to me previously about how one of the things that you offer companies is the chance to tell each other, colleagues, how they're feeling. One of the things that you showed me just recently was this new app that you've produced, which I think is really exciting, and it allows colleagues in some of the corporates you're working with to express how they are on a day-to-day basis so that they can respond to each other's needs. If one of them might be feeling a bit down for whatever reason, if their mood's being affected, it allows them to show a bit more empathy. It's one of the things that we do with the kids. We get them to do it every morning, every evening, in the course of their day so that they can express how things are for them and hopefully develop a sense of understanding between the group so that if one of them is starting to behave in a difficult way, they can place it and respond to it without them themselves getting really upset. And I suppose I wanted to know from you, what's the purpose behind the app, and is it something that you think should be happening more broadly in corporates but in other organisations as well where perhaps they don't have that language so much?
Yeah, so we've developed it because we need to create the language, because executives, by definition, do not want to go into a room and start talking about their feelings. However, if you give them a set of scientific data that they can produce that allows them to measure how they're doing, what their ability to perform is, what their likelihood of staying mentally well is, etc., then they respond to data. They like data because they can measure it and they can measure corporate performance against it. But I think the most important point is it gives me information on me. Mood is biological information on how I'm doing and how I'm going to respond to people and other people and the environment, etc. So it tells me how I'm doing, it tells me what I can expect of myself in a situation, etc. And then I can share that with a group, just like you do your check-ins. But what we've done is we've given them a harder, more scientific language that they can use, that they feel comfortable sitting behind, that they can actually then talk about ultimately how they feel.
And I really like what you said there, because actually so much of this is about self-awareness, is about supporting people to be reflective and to understand if there's a difficult interaction, is this me or is this because of the other person? And if it's me, what do I need to do about it in order so that I'm not making the situation worse? And interestingly, here at the farm, we've got a great guy who supports all of our frontline staff. If they've had a difficult interaction with a kid, they go to him in order to try and process it, understand what about that interaction might actually have been them. And I think that's a really important thing. And it makes me really sad that in schools, in social work settings, in prisons, often where they're dealing with more significant trauma than we have to deal with on the farm, there's no space for that. And coming out of this crisis, with all the challenges that we as adults are facing, I really hope that other organisations are actually able to think, what are we doing for our adults in this, to allow them to be at their best and to thrive, and to make sure they've got someone they can process whatever they're going through with.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the clinical support mechanisms have to be in place in the corporate world as well. We see ourselves as prevention, but what you've just described, absolutely, the typical corporate environment is quite pathological, just like some of the environments your children inhabit during their lives. And they are not conducive to people feeling well, being well, and being able to be a good colleague or family member, etc. So what we've got to do is help them with a load of tools, with our app, Mojo, etc., to create that environment that enables them to be at their best, because they've got control of it if they want to take control of it. That said, it's as hard to get a 45-year-old to want to take control as it is a 12-year-old, I'm sure.
Well, maybe you and I should swap places one day and we can see... we can compare notes, exactly. But I do think there's something in what you're saying there. And a lot of people maybe after this will still be of the opinion, look, we've talked about adults all the way through this. You know, why are we bothering to putting so much energy into them when actually we should be just focused on the kids in terms of the organisations we work with? And I just think when adults are at their best, when they're thriving, they're going to go above and beyond in the care for those kids in a way that the kids can really feel. It's going to make a difference to them, and then actually in the long term, it's that extra mile that those staff are willing to go that will help those kids go the extra mile themselves. And we see it at the farm, they'll be able to climb hills, do jobs that they never thought they'd be able to do, because our staff, fortunately, more often than not, are able to be at their best to provide for them. And I suppose what I would like to ask you at the end is just this question of, particularly because you have to convince hard-nosed corporate leaders around this, what is it actually in it for those organisations? You know, except for kind of, you know, it's a really buzz topic now, mental health, you know, we're all looking after each other's mental health. Why do they invest in it? Why do they get you guys involved? Why do they care so much? Because actually, if you can convince them, then surely we can convince leaders in these other care professions.
Well, I'm going to sound fairly cynical now, but it's a brilliant question, because at the beginning of 2020, it was all about PR. We need to be doing this for our people because we can attract more people, we can keep them, they can perform better, etc., etc. Now, I think most of the executives we talk to have experienced serious mood and emotional dysregulation for the first time in their lives, because we've had our worlds turned upside down. And they are seriously worried that if they're feeling that, and their people are feeling that. So for the first time ever, we've got organisations that genuinely want their people to feel good in order that they can perform better.
And it's one of the interesting, again, it came out of the last Digging Deep session, because of this experience, maybe, it's one of the opportunities, maybe we're all going to be more empathic for what it's like to be one of those vulnerable kids, and actually as a result of that, we're going to be able to connect with them in a way we never were able to before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Good to speak to you, Damien.
And you.
Wow. Well, thanks, Jake. Damien in particular, thanks, I think, to the sheep, who had a lot more to contribute than I had expected. I think the message from that at the end, that we're actually all have learned, leaders in organizations and business have learned about emotional trauma and understand perhaps more after this pandemic than they did before, how important it is to create a good culture. Now, in a moment, we will hear from young people about what their take is on this question. But actually, first, I wanted to find out what you have been saying online in our questions and polls on these questions. So one question we asked was, what is the most important element of staff culture to you? And if you click on the poll section, you'll be able to see that the answer, almost 2/3 of you, felt that having a safe space to be heard was the most important thing, followed by having opportunities to celebrate success together, and the leaders in an organization sharing their vulnerabilities came next. Quite interesting. Safe space, top of the list. And then when you look just quite bluntly at whether you yourselves feel the organization you work for cares about you, in that case, I'm pleased to say that the majority, a third, feel well cared for. 29% moderately, 21% extremely well cared for, the lucky few, and a few not cared for much, cared for a little, which is disappointing. Feel free to keep voting on those. It'll be interesting to see where they get to at the end. But now we have the opportunity to hear from young people. How does all this affect them? Indeed, does it? Let's find out. We're going to be joined next by 3 young people from Jamie's farm, Adele, John and Arthur, if you'd like to step up to the stage, and also by Tish, who's going to help find out what makes a difference for them. Hi, John, Adele, and we've got Tish masquerading on Jamie's laptop. And hopefully Arthur's going to join us as well. But while we're waiting for Arthur to join us, shall we just kick off? I was going to call you Jamie. Tish, do you want to introduce your guests and take us through a conversation about this culture of caring?
Well, these wonderful young people have been worked on the farm for. Actually, John, you've been an ambassador, so you must have been on the various farms so that's at least 4 or 5 visits, which has been fantastic to have you. And Adele is one of our apprentices. So Adele is working as part of a team in Lewis and helping deliver the programme, as we have an apprentice here in Bath doing the same. And Arthur, who's going to join us, I hope, is also someone who is he's an ambassador. He's been part of the farm group that John has been. So he's been several times. And what we must hope for today, I can see that we might have lost a few people here.
We may have done. I think we are racing to reconnect them and they'll be back up soon.
Well, what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to chat to those of you who managed to get up here on stage. Arthur had a bit of trouble yesterday. Looks like he's coming. This pandemic has put us all at the mercy, hi Arthur, of being our internet connections. Right, we're all here. That's brilliant. So I've just introduced you guys, Arthur, and I'm going to fire away with some questions. I'm going to ask John one first so that, Arthur, you can get yourself, feel that you've arrived. John, what I'd like to know from you is, from your experience, and you've worked with all the different Jamie's Farm teams, if you could tell me what you think is important about how people at Jamie's Farm are with each other and how that's helped you.
Thank you for the question. With Jamie's Farm, you know, all my experiences, all the times I've visited Jamie's Farm, there seems to be this sense of family, purpose, and team all combined together. And just immediately as you arrive at any Jamie's Farm, you know, the whole setting and gives people the opportunity to connect in that manner. And it really struck me because you get to meet different people from different places, so many faces from different backgrounds. And, you know, within few minutes, everyone starts to interact with each other and you start connecting, you start bonding, creating those relationships, you know, making new friends. And just there's something, I don't know, maybe because of the way everything is planned, the whole settings, or maybe set of nice people being chosen, but I don't know how all the processes go, but you feel welcomed, you feel like you're in a family, you feel like you're in a very peaceful family, like everyone wants to get along immediately. And, you know, it really struck me differently because it's hard to find people, you know, get attached like that for like within minutes and, you know, within those short times. It's just different.
Thank you, John. That's really helpful. And actually, Arthur, I wonder if you could add to that what you think helped you with that experience on the farm and what you think are those qualities that people had that mattered to you.
it was all about it. I think the first thing was people being willing to listen to you.
Yeah, being heard.
You know.
And Arthur, what do you think?
I think, like, just adding to what John said, when you get there, you really do get that sort of, you know, you really do get that family vibe there, and the staff there at the farm, they really do sort of care for you, and you can really feel that, and you can really feel that in the environment there. And it really just helps you yourself. It really helps push you forward. And it's just amazing how, like, the farm, how you're structured and how you support each other, not just the children, but each other yourselves, and how you push forward and push it and give it to us, if you know what I mean.
So that you feel the adults push forward, that they're challenging themselves and
yeah. And then they push it. Sorry, and then they push it onto you, and then you really, it's sort of like a two-way thing. You really sort of help each other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So that you're mirroring each other in that process. Yeah. So that's interesting. Adele, it makes me wonder then, if you've had an experience of an adult who's actually not felt at their best, who hasn't been in a good place, and how that's affected you. Might have been a visiting member of staff or someone in the Jamie's Farm team. Have you got an experience that of the opposite of that, or something different where they felt more vulnerable?
I can recall one time, like it actually happened on the farm, and this particular teacher that I went with from my school, she made it clear that she was a bit uncomfortable and a bit vulnerable within the check-in meeting, and she expressed her feelings, and the check-in meeting gave her that platform to enable her to feel like she can express that she's uncomfortable. And in a weird way, like, it made all of us feel a bit more confident in saying, yeah, we feel like that too. So it helped us all like be on the same platform and the same basis, and being able to connect in that way.
That's really interesting, because we've been talking earlier today about, you know, the importance of being able to be honest and show your vulnerability, and it's not a failure to be vulnerable. It's something that actually connects people, because we're all vulnerable. Thanks, Adele. So Arthur, I wonder, because you're still at school, and I'm wondering if you could give an example from your school setting of when you felt well supported, an adult in that setting who is well supported themselves, and how that then impacts on you.
Sorry, can you say that again? You cut out for me.
Sorry. So you're still at school, and I'm wondering if you can give us an example from maybe a member of your staff that you perceive as being well supported within the school culture, but how that support then, how you experience it as on a recipient, as a pupil.
Yeah, so I think, like, when the school have got, like, the school or different people, they support the teachers, whoever you're with, they really support them. It shows that they can really support you, if you know what I mean. So they have a back to, so if they can't answer anything, they've got something where they can go back and move back and get different angles, look at things from different things, and always come back to you. And it doesn't feel like they're falling, because it means like they can really sort of be with you, if you know what I mean. Like, they can really sort of give you different advice for different things, and they can really show you how to kind of do it and show you different angles and whatnot.
Yeah, so that you're feeling that their strength comes from being backed up, and actually that in itself gives you confidence. That's interesting. Yeah, if we don't feel confident in the people around us, conversely, you know, it's okay if they're being vulnerable, as Adele said, but people can then back them up. But equally the opposite, when someone is strong, you can feel confident that they're there for you. That's interesting. So I wonder, John, if you have observed at times when you've been on the farm with different groups of young people, and if somebody has been behaving in a difficult way, a young person, what do you think an adult needs to do in the face of that behavior?
I think the first thing an adult should do is to identify and, you know, realize that you're working with a younger person.
Yeah.
And you being an adult demands that you behave better and that you should know better. Once you create that foundation that you're an adult and this is a younger person, that will leave you the space for understanding, to give you the opportunity to try to understand the young person. And, you take a deep breath, calm down, and try to identify the problem. And, once you go through all these steps of, filled with positivity, it gives you more opportunity to approach the problem better. And, go through the problem, through talking, through showing affection, more moderate affection to the younger person, and try to get them to calm down.
That's really helpful, John, because I think you brought up something really important, that the modelling, that the adults have to remember they are the adults. And it's very easy sometimes for adults to sort of want to be like teenagers or children, but actually for you to feel safe as a young person, that you need that person to hold their authority, but also to be understanding, to be calm, to be interested, to find out what that unique problem is. Yeah. Thank you, John. That's helpful. And Adele, now you're part of a team working with young people. So you're on delivery, and you're sometimes, having to facilitate a whole group session. And yet you are closer in age to those young people. What do you think it is about the way that the Jamie's Farm does to help its staff be good with the kids? What do you feel as a team member that you get from Jamie's Farm, and what you do for each other?
Well, I think within my team, we work with each other like in a comfortable way. Like, we remain professional, but also have that sort of like silly, like more vulnerable, more like childish sort of side where we can have fun but still remain professional. But and it creates like this calm and like really like nice atmosphere to work in, where we recognise when we need help, or when someone needs space, or if someone just is not feeling like 100%. So we know when like they might need a break and someone else can step in, and we just make sure that we all perform to our best by supporting each other. So like on a Monday morning, we'll have like a little meeting to like address the week ahead, like what's going to happen and stuff like that. But then also on the Friday, we have like a meeting after the group's gone, where we can all just like explain how we're feeling about the week that's just happened and stuff like that.
I think that's really helpful to hear. I think that this notion that you are a team and that you're all interdependent is really important, but you know each other well. You kind of play together and work together, and that trust that builds up there. James, have you got any questions for any of these young people from the chat?
Oh, we haven't got any questions from the chat, but I was going to sort of suggest that we perhaps wrap it up there, because as somebody's just summed up rather neatly, Tom, in the chat, what wonderfully mature responses from our young panelists. They are so impressive. And I was going to say, I completely echo that, and really interesting to get your perspective on this. So I just wanted to wrap up by saying a huge thank you to you for taking your time to share your experiences and your insights. You were great. Thank you. And thanks, Tish. Tish, could you stay up on what is technically called the stage?
Yes.
And
See
you guys. And there, I think I somehow took myself off stage, but what I'm hoping to do is invite back Tish. Thank you to Adele, Arthur, and John for sharing their experiences. Hi, Tish. I'd also like to, if we've got Jake with us, invite Jake to join us to really wrap up the conversation and discussion and distill the essential points for us. So Jake, you need to join the stage if you're able to. And also I'm hoping we can welcome up an interesting late addition. So Charlie Middleton, I'm hoping is in the audience and is able to join us, has been listening, and he's very relevant to this discussion. Charlie, are you able to join us also? Otherwise, we will chat to you and me, Tish.
Yeah, looks like it's us.
It does look like it's us. Anyway, well, you kicked us off at the beginning with your overview from. Oh, here we go. We're joined by Charlie. Welcome. Thanks for joining. I was just going to give a little introduction to you because you're actually very relevant to this conversation because as well as having a very interesting background in the army, banking, and psychotherapy, three career paths that don't normally get wrapped together. You're also helping now at Jamie's Farm as a therapeutic supervisor, providing a sort of, we've heard it referenced during the conversation, providing a safe space for both adults as well as children. And it'd be great to just hear a little bit from you about how that works and how your role works.
No, sure, James, thank you. I think that, as you say, some of my history probably is in environments where there isn't a lot of that support and certainly well-being, although I'm glad to say that the things have moved on enormously in both of those places that I used to work in. I think at Jamie's Farm, I mean, what a fantastic session this has been, and so many wonderful, wise things said. I think there is this enduring theme, certainly as far as what's required from the Jamie's Farm staff, of them being authentic and congruent and bringing the whole of themselves to the work that they do. And a lot of that is about being very emotionally engaged. And I think part of the enabler to that is in ensuring that they are in a good space themselves, looking after their well-being. And they do a lot of that for themselves. They work very hard on it themselves. And I'm just privileged to be able to come in and support them by giving them a safe space where they can talk through some of the things that they're grappling with, understand them a bit, and I think most importantly, get a sense of how they're feeling about those things, and then they can work out how to deal with them and how to take them to someone else, maybe, or just to deal with them. And yeah, it's a great privilege to work with them, and I think it's a great tribute to Jamie's Farm that they do provide that entirely safe, confidential space. I'm never harassed by Jamie or Tish or Jake to tell them what's going on, despite having conversations with all the staff on a very regular basis.
So how does it work in practice? So you are external in the sense you come in and have is it just a open house? People sort of make an appointment, or how does it work?
No, the heads of farms are wonderful about organising. I mean, this is in normal times. Obviously, at the moment it's a bit different. I have to do it remotely, but in normal times, I will go and spend a day on each farm every month, and I will go and find a nice quiet space, and the staff will come in and see me. And sometimes we go for a walk. It depends how we're feeling and what the weather's like. But yeah, that's how it works. And
is it entirely optional, or do people choose it, or is it like expected that everybody will talk to you?
I think it's very much positioned as part of the support that Jamie's Farm provides for its staff. And if someone really doesn't want to come and talk to me, I'm not going to go and force them to. I must say that on the whole, people are great. They come and talk to me. There are obviously different types of conversations with different people, and it depends on what's going on for them. I love the farmers in particular, so they always come in and say everything's fine, and then 45 minutes later we've worked through a few things, and that's great. But no, it is, as I say, it's a huge privilege to do, and it is all about the members of staff having the opportunity to do what I've said, and they do the work. You know, they're the ones who find the solutions. They're the ones who find out and explore what's going on, and hopefully go away in a better place to be able to deal with it. But I must stress, they do all the work. I have a very nice time.
That's a fascinating role, Charlie, and it sounds like you really love it as well, which is
I do, absolutely.
And so we're really at the end now of our session. We've heard some amazing insights and incredible contributions, and I just wondered, Tish, Jake, how you would draw those together. What would be your concluding thoughts for the audience?
I think it's extraordinary that we've had so
eloquent speakers, but there's so much consensus. But I think it is really interesting that we now know so much more about how the brain works, and that that some of them are sort of more Victorian idioms that might have been drivers for people in workplaces have been displaced rightfully by a valuing of giving people time, listening to them, giving them a sense of fun, nurturing them, giving a stretch, and involving them. So I think at Jamie's Farm, the developing the vision in a collaborative sense, and that's what I take everything from the children. They teach me really what we're doing well and what we're not doing well enough. And I think when they said a sense of family, I think that that's come out through the different discussions today, that you need, in a functional family, you need the male, what I would call, it could be held by a woman, but it is the paternal principle, which is the vision and the direction and some structure, and you need the nurture, which is the feminine principles, and the compassion and the collaboration and the intuition, and those elements together hold people to flourish and thrive. I don't know, what would you say, Jake?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible afternoon. Thank you, James, for chairing it so brilliantly. Just picking up on what you say there, Tish, and John said it best. Within 2 minutes, you can feel that culture. You can feel it straight away, that familial culture, the fact that people want to be with each other and they want to welcome these young people each and every week. And just to go back to that point that was asked earlier around, could it go too far the other way? Where's the challenge? Where's the stretch? It's just, again, it's a false dichotomy. It's not one or the other. By having one, you achieve more. You know, it is that classic thing. You're able to overcome these challenges by having the kind of nurturing culture that allows people to work together and to achieve more together. And that is partly because individuals are given their space, but it's also because we have this, it's one of Feilden's laws, which I think, what is it, Jamie's grandfather wrote down at one point, he's got above his desk. One of them is, we can achieve almost anything if we don't care who gets the credit. And I think that's a good mantra for us at Jamie's Farm, and it's a really important one that we have in that equal basis around the dinner table at Jamie's Farm, for the kids as well as the adults, all of us working together, survival of the friendliest, and we can achieve more.
Jake, that's a great point to wrap us up on and end on. And I'd just like to thank you both, and to Charlie as well, throughout this. It's been really fascinating. Thank you to all of our contributors. In fact, I've learned a huge amount. I think I've concluded at least that the original question, toughening up, get tough is not the right approach. But equally, creating a culture of well-being, while it's essential, is itself quite a tough thing to do, and it's not easy. We need the three magic words that you heard earlier: safety, trust, and of course hope, and even relentless love. So all I can say is that I've learned a lot, but I more importantly hope that you've all learned a lot. And if you'd like to learn more, please do join us at the next Digging Deep event, which is on the 1st of April. It's going to be called A Sense of Space, and it's going to explore how the spaces around us affect our emotional and mental well-being and help us all to thrive. That sounds fascinating. I hope that I can be part of that event. But for now, I just want to thank everybody involved and thank our wonderful audience for joining us and lending us their ears. I'd also frankly thank the sheep who made the unexpected but considerable contribution. For now, goodbye, good afternoon, and see you next month.